Using notes or no?
So Bill is handing out a really interesting piece from a Catholic priest in Dallas about why a letter from Birmingham jail is still important and should still resonate with all of us as Christians. But I would ask that you hold off on reading that until we actually finish our discussion. And then, because Bill loves to distribute comics, we also get some funnies to go with the article.
That have to do with last.
No, it's last week's.
Oh, it's last week's. Oh, I didn't actually look at it. Okay, so this week we're sticking with the Benedictine value of stability, but the habit of mind we're going to be discussing is responsible risk-taking. And so I just want to start with the question generally to all of you of what responsible risk-taking means, or means to you.
I'm going to offer an answer which, after reading this, is clearly wrong, but when I hear responsible risk-taking, I always think of the example of like saving up for retirement. You should put some money in stocks because money is worth less in the future.
Okay, but are you really taking a risk?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Especially if you're investing in stocks.
Okay, stocks, sure.
I mean, you can find experts who are definitely a minority view who say that this is not the smart thing to do, so it's a risk.
Okay, so investment,
But it's
for the future.
responsible because I think they're wrong.
Okay. You think they're wrong?
I think the people who say that's a bad investment are wrong. So
Oh, okay.
I find that risk to be responsible.
Okay.
But it's not like this caliber.
Well, yes, it's not like this caliber of risk.
But are you saying that responsible means you're not really taking a risk? Is that what you're saying?
No, I recognize that it's still a risk. So when I say I think they're wrong, what I mean is I think they're probably wrong. That's what I mean.
Okay, yes.
I equate the word
His
responsible with the
expected
word
value.
prudence.
Okay, prudence.
Yeah, prudent risk-taking.
Prudent risk-taking.
I always go back to critical thinking. You're thinking about the risk and weighing the cost and benefits, and putting all your money and have a 1 out of 1,000 chance, is probably very risky. Whereas if you take money out for surgery or whatever, then yes, that's a risk, but you weigh the cost and benefits.
I think Bill hits on an important point in responsible risk-taking. Cost-benefit analysis. Does the potential positive outcome outweigh the potential negatives whenever we're considering risk-taking? And I think that leads us nicely then into the risks that Dr. King is taking in Birmingham and the risks that he is challenging his fellow clergymen and fellow white, well, not fellow white, and white moderates around America with taking as well. But before we get into this, as a historian, I always enjoy contextualization because it gives us a nice stable base from which to operate. So what do we know about Martin Luther King and who this man is in April of 1963? Why do we care about this letter?
Well, he's in jail.
Okay, he's in jail. Well, we'll get to why he's in jail in a second. But as a man, who is he?
Son of a preacher, grandson of a preacher. I mean,
Yeah.
a long line of dedicated to God.
Yes, okay.
Leading a non-violent revolt.
Nonviolent resistance leader. A preacher, and the son of a preacher, and the grandson of a preacher. Baptist specifically.
He's extremely well educated.
Yes, right? PhD from Boston, right?
Boston University.
Boston University, sorry. So it's not be confused with Boston College.
And in a wide sense educated too, though.
Right.
Yeah, you see a lot of name dropping here that he knows what he's doing.
He didn't originally see himself as the leader of a movement. It was thrust upon him.
Good, yes. And when does this get thrust upon him? When does his leadership first emerge? Does anybody know?
Yeah, the bus boycott.
Yes. The Montgomery bus boycott. And what year is that?
Isn't it 58?
Close, 54.
Same year as segregation.
Right, so yes, going back to resistance, what is he resisting? Segregation, right?
Well, he's also the leader of the SCLC. too.
Okay, so out of the Montgomery bus boycott, we have the foundation of the SCLC. What is the SCLC?
Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Right, and what is the goal of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference? Does anybody know why he founds it?
Promote human rights in the South.
To promote human rights in the South, but specifically, what power is he trying to harness?
Power of the clergy.
The power of the clergy, right? It is a challenge to the African American and white churches of the South to use their moral authority and their ability to organize to help drive this civil rights movement in its nascent stages in 1954 and then throughout the 1960s.
So I think he said the black clergy. Didn't he have white clergy in mind before he started organizing?
Absolutely, yes. But most of the original people who joined the SCLC are members of the black clergy.
That turned out to be one of the big disappointments.
Correct.
This and other things I've read.
Yes.
And I always thought that he wrote, he was in jail, he had nothing better to do, so he wrote this letter. Well, it turns out that when he was put in jail, there were 8 white rabbis, priests, and Protestant ministers who published this open letter about, hey, you need to be patient, and nonviolence is good because it's better than violence, and we praise the Montgomery Police Force for being so, maintaining order. And so, he's writing a general letter to everybody, but really, this letter is attacking the 8 clergymen who are totally clueless, and they're not standing for the moral right.
Right, good.
It's not a letter to everybody.
It's not a letter to everybody, although it ends up becoming a letter to
Right, but it's
everybody.
addressed to clergy.
Correct, yes. So why is he in Birmingham in the first place? Why is he in Birmingham in April 1963?
Because they were boycotting segregation.
Because they were boycotting segregation, because Birmingham had achieved a reputation as the most segregated city in America, right? There's a number of reasons for this. Birmingham has a population of about 350,000 at the time, 60% Caucasian, 40% African American, but there are no city firefighters that are African American, no black city police officers, no black bus drivers. In the private sector, there are no black sales clerks, no cashiers, no bank tellers. Black women are forbidden by law to be secretaries to white professionals. Even among the laboring forces that largely work in the steel mills of Birmingham, an entry-level position for a white man pays $1, 40% less, or 40% more than what African Americans make. They have abject poverty all around Birmingham, and the unemployment rate is 2.5 times among the African American community what it is among the white community. In addition to that, there are 50 unsolved bombings in Birmingham up to between 1950 and 1963. 50 unsolved bombings of African American churches and homes, so that it had earned the nickname around America of Bombingham instead of Birmingham. And then the NAACP gets banned, right? They pass a law in Birmingham saying no NAACP in this city. And so a minister by the name of Fred Shuttlesworth starts his own commission on human rights in Alabama. And he takes the initial steps in trying to address the segregation issue. The immediate cause of the movement is that federal courts had ruled that the city of Birmingham had to desegregate the public parks, pools, and golf courses. What does the city do instead?
Shut them down.
Closes them all down, right? And so Fred Shuttlesworth sends a letter to the city council and the mayor saying, please reconsider this decision, we can work together. And the mayor very famously crumbles it up and throws it in the garbage can. And so then Shuttlesworth contacts the SCLC and says, I'm in over my head, I need your help. And so that is why they're in Birmingham, to address this miscarriage of equality in Birmingham and use it as a launching point for a larger movement as well. And then specifically, why is he in jail? Does anybody know what he specifically did to get himself landed in jail?
You didn't have a parade permit?
He didn't have a permit to march in a parade on Good Friday. Right? They've been demonstrating in Birmingham for about a week. Among the tactics that they've been using to this point were sit-ins at lunch counters, at city-owned buildings, and in various stores, kneel-ins at white churches, wherein black people would go in to pray until they were forcibly removed by the police. And then they also started a voter registration drive as well. Despite the fact that Birmingham does have a rather sizable African American population, less than 10% of them are registered to vote. Right? That's just a result of Jim Crow. And so he marches on Good Friday anyway, and this lands him in jail. Okay, I think that catches. Yes.
So how long did he end up staying in jail?
He stayed in jail for 8 days. He could have gotten out immediately. Right, there were people willing to pay his bail, and Bull Connor, the police commissioner for Birmingham, doesn't want King there. But King purposely stays. When the Kennedys speak to Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King's wife, and say, "Hey, we can get your husband out of jail," she says, "No, that's where he wants to be." He marched knowing he would get arrested, and he has chosen to stay. So he's in jail for 8 days. And while he's in jail, as Bill has informed us, 8 white clergy members from Alabama published an editorial called A Call for Unity, in which they criticize the actions of Martin Luther King and the SCLC. So, yes?
Another question.
Sure.
So in terms of this being written while he's in jail, did he, I guess, write it solely while he's there, get out and edit it later on?
Okay.
Put it together based on his thoughts of that?
Sure, that's a good question. So the original version was written on the margins of newspapers and on scraps of paper that were smuggled to him by one of the jail janitors. That's how he originally writes it. Once he gets out of jail, excuse me, the New York Times has an interest in publishing it, and so they ask for a copy, and so then he collects his notes and writes into the more formal version that we see here. The New York Times ends up deciding not to publish it. Then the New York Post will publish excerpts of it, but not the full thing. The full version will be printed not until July 1863, 1963, sorry, that's the Civil War historian in me. The Atlantic Monthly will publish it in totality in July 1963. But they don't publish it as a letter from a Birmingham jail. They call it The Negro Is Your Brother.
Right.
Yeah, and then he will publish it. King himself will include it in his book of essays in 1964, Why We Can't Wait. And since then, it's gone on to become one of the most widely reprinted essays in the United States.
Who was the one who originally published it in the full?
In full, The Atlantic. The Atlantic Monthly.
In 68?
No, 63. 63. Yes.
6 months later?
July, so 4 months later. May, June, 3 months later.
One last question.
Yes.
So, and this might be something you want to wait till later. Why do you think out of all the different things that King wrote, this one became particularly famous?
Well, that's a good question. You all read it. Why do you think this resonates so much for the last 55 years among Americans and worldwide? It's not just Americans who consume Letter from Birmingham Jail. This is published worldwide.
I mean, one of the things that I noticed is it's packed with emotion, but it's not an emotional argument.
Yeah.
Right? So he's not arguing from feeling. He's arguing very rationally, and at the same time, he's trying to vocalize the frustration of an entire, segment of people. It's a way in which people can look at it and say, well, I never knew it was that bad for them. I never knew, It sheds light on a situation that a lot of white people had no idea was even going on.
Okay, good. Television will also do that. Very famously, after King gets out of jail, they organize the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, and that restraint that the white clergy so praised the Birmingham police officers for demonstrating completely evaporates during the Children's Crusade. That's when, I'm sure you've all seen clips of it before, but the high-powered fire hoses, the dogs, going essentially after high school kids. So that restraint disappears very quickly.
I think he points to something in here that's really powerful, and that is that when you have an oppressed people, and that oppression's gone on for a long time, you've got essentially, this dynamite about to blow, and you have to have an outlet for it, and you can't. Well, so that's part of what's going on. You have this lingering injustice that just has gotten worse in the 50s in terms of people's perceptions of it and their willingness to take it anymore. And so you need an outlet. There has to be an outlet. And so there has to be confrontation. So he talks about that tension, right, that happens. We need to confront. So he's confrontational.
Right.
And I think people who are oppressed feel that need to confront, So I think he's confrontational, but he's not violent. I think that's an important saving grace. Now, that relies on the hypocrisy of the nation. In other words, we have this freedom that everybody aspires to, and that we pay lip service to, that everybody can obtain. We have this group here that can't obtain it. So he's able to put his finger directly on that hypocrisy. And the laws are on his side because they prevent a hugely violent response. I think it takes another piece, and the other piece is the press. It takes a free press, bringing attention to this thing that's going on, and so on. So it's like 3 or 4 pieces in here that fit together, and he was able to mobilize all parts of it. Because I was thinking, this kind of thing obviously couldn't happen in the Soviet Union, right? You have the Soviet Union, line them up, shoot them. Did it happen? No, this never happened. Did the press report on it? No, there's no press to report on it, and so on. So there's nothing, right? No. But, like for example, with Britain and Gandhi, nonviolent confrontation.
Yeah.
So, and their laws were set up, presumably, that everybody would have this freedom and so on. And they weren't allowing the indigenous people to have the freedom. So there's that confrontation, and they have this hypocrisy in the laws that they can pinpoint and apply pressure on. You have press and so on.
It's interesting you bring up the law, because the law makes up a big part of this document, right?
Appeal to natural law and the divine law.
Good, right? Yes, he has this appeal between natural law and the laws of Birmingham. Because one of the things that the 8 clergy criticized King and his movement for is breaking the law, right? That King and his movement and those who ascribe to the civil rights movement are encouraging southern states to adhere to the Supreme Court ruling of Brown v. the Board of Education and move towards desegregation. And yet, King and his followers in Birmingham are willfully breaking the law and going to jail. And so, how does King strike a balance between those?
The basic appeal to the divine law, and he explicitly cites Aquinas. The other point is, I think he alludes explicitly to Socrates. I don't recall his digging into the Crito, but in the Crito, Socrates is offered the chance by a rich friend of getting off the hook if he goes off into exile. And I said, well, listen, I was raised by the laws. Don't I deserve to stay here? No, but they're going to kill you. I said, wouldn't I deserve it? So that tension of, say, in effect, forcing the person who's attempting to use the law as a cover for injustice actually to carry through on a palpable injustice.
Right. law as a cover for injustice is no law at all, right?
He goes back and says, we should never, on page 7, we should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. And he goes on to say that a legal law that is unjust is no such law in the first place.
That broaches also the issue of, say, what counts as law. I don't think he works this in here, but the notion that Aquinas has of an ordinance of reason, that it's made for the common good or the good of the community, that it is made by someone who actually has care of the whole community or responsibility for it, and that it's promulgated. Promulgation, I think, is okay, but it's just the other three issues that for the essence of law would fail.
Okay, anybody else have any other thoughts about why it resonates so deeply over all these years?
I think that it resonates because it talks about this sense of peace that comes from just ignoring something, and then a sense of peace that is true peace when there's justice. And so it can be applied to any time where people get put down for saying, well, you're just stirring up trouble to break up the peace that we all, it's just more peaceful to not deal with it.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, one reason it resonates is because he died for it.
Yes, that's true. I mean, he dies for his beliefs, right?
I mean, when we talk about responsible risk, a lot of times we think of, I'm weighing the cost and benefit for me, how it's going to turn out for me, right? But there's certain things that it's not irresponsible to risk your life for.
Right.
And he knew, I mean, maybe not 1963, but going to Memphis in 1968, because he was told and told and told, he knew that he was run, and he very openly was willing to run that risk of giving his life for that cause.
I mean, he knew in 63 because in 54 his house was shot up in Montgomery. A bomb was exploded. He was stabbed in the chest. Now, that probably was more because the woman was a little unstable. That was at a New York book signing after the Montgomery bus boycott. But his life had been actively threatened for 9 years prior to this. So he certainly knew the risks. And he addresses this idea of responsible risk-taking in the letter itself, right? You guys remember which section I'm talking about?
I know there's the section where he's talking about the churches, and he says, what good is the church that doesn't stand up for morality, right?
Save that for my next question. You're jumping the gun on my next question.
Okay, so maybe. But the other thing about this is, when you're talking about costs and benefits, often I'm an economist and we usually apply that to material cost and benefit. But the real cost is the cost of losing his soul. And he's saying to the white people, you're going to lose your soul, you know? And so, what kind of, I mean, it's sort of a nolo contendere, right? You have to take the ultimate risk. You're going to lose your soul doing the opposite, right?
Right.
So, I don't know, it just seems as though throughout all of this, you have this business about losing your soul.
Good. Yeah. We'll come back to that in just a minute when I address who he challenges to become responsible risk takers. But I was thinking more specifically
What was your question?
about when he addresses this idea of responsible risk taking. At the top of page 14, I have no despair about the future. I have no fear about the outcome of our struggle in Birmingham, even if our motives at present are misunderstood. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with America's destiny.
By the way, I can hear the echoes of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address here, where Lincoln skips the Constitution to the Declaration of Independence? Why go 67 years and miss the Constitution? Well, one thing is the Constitution is this peculiar ratio about how much of a person do people count as?
Zero. Zero. You count as 0 person if you're a slave. But 3/5 of you will count towards apportionment in the House of Representatives. Yeah, and electoral college. Yes, so like Lincoln before him, he roots his radicalism in the Declaration of Independence, because the Declaration of Independence is the foundation of American radicalism, right? The idea that all men are created equal and entitled to certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and not the Lockean property, but the pursuit of happiness, right? In which each man can decide for themselves what that means. Jefferson purposely excludes property from the Declaration of Independence because it's more than property, right? Whereas the Constitution is heavily rooted in property rights and defining what property is. Good. So for King then, what does this whole situation demonstrate for him about responsible risk-taking? The whole situation in Birmingham. What is the cost-benefit analysis for Martin Luther King, for Fred Shuttlesworth, for Ralph Abernathy, and for everyone who's down there supporting this movement?
Well, because I think he's looking at it from a more moral analysis, that this is right and wrong. So there's not a gray area here. And he says, there's no timetable for injustice. So if something's right or wrong, and absolutely so, then there's no analysis on when you do it, or if you do it, or what the consequences are for you personally if you do it, because as Rick pointed out, the consequences are loss of who you are.
The further point that he makes, he just quotes the proverb, justice delayed is justice denied. So the fundamental issue is, am I giving the other person what he deserves? And if I don't, then I'm unjust.
It seems like he's risking his rooting his risk-taking more, but not just in the Declaration. That's one example of him rooting his radicalism and his risk-taking in the way things ought to be. Like, yes, what the country ought to be, but more than that, what the law ought to be, and what the church ought to be. And so he's making this risk to illustrate what things country, church, law ought to be, with the confidence that because that's what they ought to be, it's not a wasted risk.
Right.
In a way, Lincoln does the same thing in the Gettysburg Address by alluding to the problem of being born of Hagar or born of Sarah. This notion of liberty or slavery is exactly the centerpiece of that discussion. So, which covenant are you in? I don't think that even that Protestants could have been deaf to the background of the peculiar pro-life character in the Declaration of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address.
I think we go back to the complexity issue. I mean, one of the beautiful things about this is, even though it's very quotable, you can't summarize it in a tweet, or you can't summarize it in a soundbite, even though the Negro is your brother probably gets as close. Because he makes at least 3 types of analysis. He does a philosophical one based on revelation. He does a one based on Christian principles, and then one based on American founding principles.
Right. Yeah, so this is another, yes, it is, he's very tied to the radicalism of the Declaration, but of course, he is a Baptist minister, he is a theologian. Jefferson was none of those things, right?
Right.
If the Declaration had been like, slavery, he would have just torn up the Declaration.
Right.
Who would have?
The foundation's a little strong.
Jefferson?
No.
King. Right.
Like if the Declaration had been unjust, he would have torn that up just as much as anything.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, William Lloyd Garrison doesn't burn copies of the Declaration of Independence during his abolitionist rallies, right? He burns copies of the Constitution. I was going somewhere with that, but I just lost where I was going.
I guess, well, I don't want to derail you.
No, it's okay.
But so now I'm kind of thinking, well, all right, so responsible risk-taking means that you're taking a risk that's justified by the end, by the goal, by what things ought to be. And so now I'm a student writing a paper, and I'm thinking, well, so does responsible risk-taking mean that, like, I take the risk to write the kind of paper I've been asked to write, even though I'm not sure how to do it, or it sounds ambitious? I guess I'm trying to do the translating it to what to the benefit of the experience. But maybe I'm jumping the gun on that, and I'm okay with that.
On that, John Sedek just did a recent study of why students don't participate or answer questions in class. And he's requiring this, he can do a cold call where they have to turn in their thoughts. And it might even, the student basically writes that my fellow students are missing, they're afraid to take a risk throwing out what they believe in class. And she goes, that's what college is for, and if you can't do it here, or you think you're going to do it out in the real world. But I mean, the risk is you're afraid to voice your opinion that somebody might say you're wrong, or can you explain that or justify it?
So in a sense, a risk, responsible risk-taking, is identifying a goal that is worth acting towards. Mm-hmm. And you fail in a responsible risk if you have a lousy goal or if you don't act towards it.
But also, tying back to last week, one thing a responsible risk can't be is impulsive.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
but you have to reflect on it before you make the risk.
Right, and so to tie into both of those, right, part of it is not just that it's a goal that is worth risking something for, but it is a goal for which you are willing to pay the consequence, right? Well, that's part of what King is saying, is that, like, this is a goal that is worth, like, I'm happy either way, right? Like, I either go to jail or I don't, but this is a goal that's worth either of those outcomes. And so, you know, it's not just that it's a goal that's worth risking, it's a goal that's worth failing at. Right. Like, that would still be better than not acting.
Right. Now, you know, in a way, this also touches on a further point. Pius XII made an observation during some difficult times in Europe. It says, everyone has the right to call upon his neighbor to sacrifice, but no one has the right to sacrifice his neighbor. What's interesting about King's move is he put himself on the line. And that does not sacrifice the neighbor. But interestingly, in the case of unjust neighbors, it makes it harder for them to be able to say, I'm being just.
Right. Yes, King definitely, I mean, he is a living demonstration of leadership matters, right? I mean, he puts himself on the front line time and time and time, as do many other members of the civil rights movement. I mean, sometimes I feel like we get a little too caught up in just King, because there are other people doing really important things. James Baldwin, Fred Shuttlesworth,
Evers.
Yeah, Medgar Evers. Absolutely, the women as well. I mean, there's a lot of people investing a lot of time and energy. I mean, the Freedom Riders. I mean, talk about risk taking. Are you guys? Everyone's familiar with the Freedom Riders, right? Working to desegregate interstate bus lines, and they get firebombed in Anniston, Mississippi. They get hospitalized, and yet they don't give up. They continue to push forward to secure these basic rights for their fellow citizens, for their fellow man. Okay, so who then is King calling on in this letter to be more responsible risk takers?
His fellow clergy.
His fellow clergy?
Especially the white ones.
Especially the white ones.
Right. Spell clergy for one.
Yep. By the way, on that topic, I was touched by his observation about, what was it? Blank Hill College, Spring Hill College.
Yes,
in Mobile.
In Mobile, because the Catholic Church did in fact desegregate.
Yeah.
I gather that some movements in that direction have been going on for a while, although, as we say, Catholics did not seem to be a majority in the Deep South.
I believe Spring Hill was the first college in Alabama to desegregate.
What was the date of the Brown v. Board of Education? I know, but what was the date?
Oh, like the day?
August 8th.
Yeah, but I don't know the exact. Anyway, so yes, white clergy. We'll get that answer, Rick, and I will provide it for you. Bill's working on it right now. I'm not sure of the exact date.
May 17th.
May 17th.
So it was in the works at the time he was writing.
Well, it's 54.
So that was, yeah.
So this is 9 years before Birmingham jail. But it's after Montgomery.
I'm sorry, back to Montgomery.
Okay.
So it was, those were simultaneous events, Montgomery bus boycott?
So the bus boycott starts in December of 54 and it ends.
So it's after boycott.
And it ends December of 55.
Yeah, it's after.
Yeah, so it's 385 days in all. So it is after Brown v.
So
Board.
tell me just, again, I don't want to take this in different direction than you want to go, but was that the catalyst for this particular, for Montgomery?
For Montgomery? Well, I mean, no. Claudette Colvin was a 15-year-old pregnant African-American girl who was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on public transportation in Montgomery. And the NCAA pursued a court case on her behalf, but they didn't go with a bus boycott for her because she was a controversial figure. Unwed, pregnant teen, and the baby is a result of an extramarital affair. So they wait for Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks is a part-time secretary for the NAACP in Montgomery. And according to Rosa, she was motivated by her activity in the NAACP, but more specifically by the murder of Emmett Till. When she was ordered to give up her seat, Rosa Parks said, "I just kept thinking about that poor boy and I couldn't do it anymore." So the immediate motivation for the Montgomery bus boycott is closer to Emmett Till and less to Brown v. Board of Education.
So that was her immediate.
That was her immediate motivation, yes. But I think the Supreme Court gave the Montgomery bus boycott a leg to stand on. I mean, they knew at the very least they had the court system at the federal level, certainly not the local level, but at the federal level, they had the court system on their side.
Here's just a follow-up question, because you were saying these laws were in place, but they were in a sense just city and state laws, whereas the tsunami was happening, in the rest of the nation following.
Yes, but these are very strong local and state laws. I mean, they've been in place since 1877 to systematically rob African Americans of their civil rights through grandfather clauses, through poll taxes, through literacy tests, through sharecropping regulations, through black codes. They had found a way to rob. So, yes, they're state laws, which federal law obviously supersedes, but you need to have a federal government that is willing to actually supersede those state laws. And we don't have that until Lyndon Johnson, really.
Well,
so just to add a personal note to that, my father in 1968 as a junior in high school desegregated a black high school in Columbia, South Carolina, 14 years after Brown v. Board.
but that was part of the tsunami,
Yes.
I mean, it's,
Right, but 14 years later, it was still another 5 years after this, and there were still high schools in a state capital that were not desegregated.
There were actually two, there was a Brown v. Board too, because, and they defined it as with all deliberate speed.
Right.
Which in the South, all deliberate speed could mean.
Slow as molasses.
Slow as molasses.
Okay, so we are running out of time, so I'd like to bring this back then, if I could. So white clergy, and who's the other group?
The white moderate?
White moderates, right? He says, nobody has disappointed me more than these two groups because they're just complacent. They're just so secure in their own place in the world that they won't even consider joining us in this crusade of justice. All right, and then my last, to circle around then to the Benedictine value of stability. How is this pushing, how is the movement in Birmingham, and how is the letter from Birmingham jail, how does that align with the Benedictine value of stability?
Because you have to be rooted in something that's good, true, and beautiful. If you're on, you can't be stable on top of something that's unstable.
This is a balanced way of life and love. So if we're not loving our fellow man, then we're in an unstable direction.
He makes the extremism for bad or extremism for good argument, or for love
And
specifically.
you don't leave when it gets uncomfortable.
Right, don't leave when it gets uncomfortable, don't run away. One of the things I thought was interesting, we believe in a commitment to one's vocation and daily rhythm of life, following St. Benedict and St. Scholastica, to develop a balanced way of life and love for the people and place, along with fidelity to its traditions.
Doesn't sound like a letter to the Birmingham Tree. That doesn't sound like a letter to the Birmingham.
No, that is our little header on this week's reading. But this fidelity, love of place, along with fidelity to its traditions.
You gotta be careful with that.
Right, you gotta be careful with that, because it is fidelity to traditions that cripples these people, right?
One of the things that would seem to be interesting is that if it's the case that moral judgment can also be rooted in truth, then it would seem that rootedness in truth would be the foundation of the stability. And that might also explain why the letter still has a kind of explosive appeal, because, how should we say, it's not as though we fully achieved justice.
Right, yes, and that actually, to tie into the article Bill passed out, is a big part of what Joshua Whitfield is stressing in his article, that we still, it's been 50 years and we still have work to do.
So which of their immediate goals did they get?
Okay, so which of their immediate goals do they eventually get out of the Birmingham movement? They get the parks reopened and desegregated. They get a pledge from the city to hire black police officers, firefighters, and bus drivers, which they hold true on. The city does all of those things. Local businesses agree that 10% of their employees going forward will work as either sales clerks or cashiers. They remove all the whites only signs. They allow African American women to try clothes on in fitting rooms for the first time. I think that's it. Yeah. But that's
a lot.
That's a lot, you know?
It's a lot from the white people's point of view.
Right.
Yes.
Was it
Minimalism.
And that makes Birmingham, Alabama, the mecca of equality that it is today.
I don't know about the mecca of equality, but you know, they do have a beautiful civil rights museum down there.
I don't know if this is going to take it off in a direction that we're not ready for. Rooted in love of place, one of the things we've noticed is that some of our students love this place so much that they do not leave. And so the tradition of getting out into the world and taking that place with you and creating new community and new love is something, I don't know if it's too early to address as for our freshmen, or if it's something that we just want to work on over the next 4 years with them.
Oh, I think that's good. I think that's an interesting thought.
Because if that weren't true, there'd only be Monte Casino.
Right. Right.
And then we wouldn't have the Monte Casino to Metten in Germany, to Pennsylvania, to here, to Brazil. Right? And that's just one leg of a spider.
One of the topics throughout DC experience, one of the points is the complexity issue. And whenever I think of showing the students complexity, introducing the complexity of reality, and I mentioned sometimes in different conversations that, but the liberal arts and what we're trying to do here should help us find clarity amidst the complexity. Would it be fair for me to say the clergy and the white moderates only will see this is a complex issue. We need to be patient. We need to wait because there's so much complexity. And what makes Letter to Birmingham Prison so powerful is that it's pretty simple. I mean, it's like, this is a truth that should be simple. And it takes a lot of, skill here to demonstrate it, but in some ways it's a very simple truth that cuts through the complexity and shows that this really shouldn't be that hard of a thing for us to get behind,
Right, yeah.
So in some ways, like, we want to show complexity, but here I think it's a good opportunity to show we can be burdened by the complexity and be frozen by it. And sometimes there's just a simple truth, especially moral truth here that we should all be able to get behind.
Right, and I mean, and I think that brings us, right, like you said, back to the morals. Like this is right or wrong. There isn't any gray room on this.
Yeah.
So with regard to that again, and back to the risk taking, I just have trouble accepting that he would see that there was any risk. In other words, he saw that this drive for freedom is just so deeply rooted in who we are as human. He saw that the Declaration of Independence, asserted it correctly. He saw that it was morally correct. And we did have Brown versus Board of Education saying that this, Declaration of Independence is coming into the present. And so, from the viewpoint of somebody willing to give their life for the thing, where's the risk? I mean, that's the way I see it.
We've got to help people remember that initially, I don't imagine that he, any more than anyone, wanted to die.
Well, of course not.
So it's a process.
Well, it's not a matter of wanting to die.
It's a process, right?
It's a
Because
matter of
we're
being
trying to
willing.
talk with Freshman about this.
He's already been at it 9 years, though. He's been shot and everything else.
He's been shot at.
But he's been shot at.
It's also true, though, that he doesn't see this as inevitable, just because it's part of the principles of the U.S. He says on page 8 that, because the teachings of Christ take time, that's a tragic misconception of time from the strangely irrational notion that there's actually something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively.
But
what do you do with the time that you've been given?
But he's using it. He's confronting directly. And I mean, this whole thing about the nonviolent movement, the confrontation is a key part of it.
Right.
And here, evidently, is the worst city in the nation, state in the nation. I'm really impressed that that's where they went to that, and then confronted directly.
So the thing that I think is really, and you kind of mentioned it, but he really goes after the idea of the complacent church. And this is on page 13. So he's talking about there's a time when the church was powerful. He goes through the whole thing about the early Christians versus the Romans. And he says, so often the contemporary church is a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. So often it is an arch defender of the status quo. And I think this is one of those places where it seems complex, but we have to get to the simplicity of stability is not the status quo, but still stability goes deeper than that, back to a rootedness in God and Christ's message of justice.
And natural law.
And right, and so, far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often vocal sanction of things as they are. And I think that seeing change as a part of stability, like that I can be stable in something so that I am free to change, is something that, that's something that I think the students are going to have a hard time with. But it's part of this responsible risk taking. I'm rooted enough that I can potentially risk this part. I can risk being wrong in Dr. Saltzman's class because I know that that's not going to affect my deeper advancement and learning and
the need for change and stability is not just that being rooted in something can demand that I act for a change, but it also involves changing to be rooted into something. So the whole advantage and stability is based on the conversion, right? The conversion of life to the thing that makes you stable. So you have that kind of you turn towards the thing that is your solid foundation. And then that enables you know, to spend like 200 years building an abbey out of stone, or, you know, engaging on a lifelong project to change the country.
14 years before he died. That's a long, long time.
Another reason that kids don't take the risk in a class is because they don't want to be humiliated. Right? He quoted T.S. Eliot, and I often tell him, T.S. Eliot says, "You'll find that you survive humiliation, and it's an experience of incalculable value."
I was struck by the coincidence that 1968 marked not only the death of King, but also Humane Vitae. Very interesting year.
Yes, yeah, for a lot of reasons.
Mark Kurlansky has a whole book on 1968.
There's been a series on C-SPAN 2? Just C-SPAN about 1968 in America as the true formative year in the United States.
Yeah, and that's right. And the change in terms of us becoming divided, more divided.
The year of divisiveness, right? And then the gap is just...
Yeah, and then leading current politics.
Right. Like the Missouri Compromise in 1820 was the beginning of the divisiveness. This C-SPAN series says 68 is the beginning of a divisiveness in America.
So when
and 43 years later, we haven't had a civil war yet. So
yeah, not yet. So
there's another book called Before the Shooting Begins.
Yeah, we're a long way off from where they were in the 1860s, though.
We hope. We have the technology.
Yeah, that's good. All right, thank you, everyone. The other thing, which I'm surprised when you mentioned, it is also beautifully written. I think that's another reason why it resonates so well, right? I mean, he's no hack, that's for sure.